This is a video on borderline personality disorder. I'm going to describe it out of the DSM first and then go ahead and talk about it a little bit afterwards. So the diagnosis would be made based on the idea of having a pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image, or affects, mood, and marked impulsivity beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, including 5 or more of the following characteristics. Number 1 is frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. Number 2, a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. So essentially what that means is that these people tend to look at people in their life as either good daddy, good mommy, bad mommy. They do not really see them as adults. Number 3, identity disturbance, markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. These are people who tend to put relationships above anything else and need to have somebody take care of them. They have not fully grown up. Number 4 is impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging: spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, binge eating. Number 5, recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, threats, or self-mutilating behavior. Now, with all diagnosis, what you look at is there is mild, moderate, and severe. And you would only see the self-mutilating, severe self-mutilating in severe. However, lots of people, especially these days during adolescence, go in for cutting. Luckily, most of it is transient. However, sometimes it continues through a lifetime. Number 6 is affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood, intense episodic dysphoria, irritability or anxiety, usually lasting a few hours, rarely more than a few days. So essentially somebody who is overreactive, overly dramatic, overly moody. 7 is chronic feelings of emptiness without another. 8 is inappropriate intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. And this again would be due to viewing people in their lives as essentially a parental figure. They demand absolute loyalty. Essentially for someone to feel loved who is borderline, they would need you to know exactly what they were thinking. You would need to anticipate their needs. You would have to agree with the way they think about everything. You would take their side against everyone else. And essentially you would have no thoughts of your own, and they would consider that unconditional love. Love of a parent for a child, and even that is asking way too much of a parent. And 9, transient or self-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. So essentially not really feeling who they are in their own body. So essentially, there are a lot of similarities between borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. It's a disorder of not growing up completely and having difficulty with object relations. In other words, to see people as 3-dimensional human beings who are just as important as you are and inherently separate. So usually this develops in parenting, that the parenting is either too smothering or too abandoning, or at least feels so for the particular child. So a narcissistic person, although they're deeply insecure, they have an overlay of thinking that they're the best person in the world, and they've often been spoiled as a kid. But again, deeply insecure. A borderline person would tend to be extremely insecure. They often didn't feel they got what they needed, and they tend to have tantrums. So a narcissistic person very often is an angry adolescent who wants it all their way, and a borderline personality disorder person is a tantruming child looking for their mother or father. Interestingly enough, these two people often find each other because the narcissistic person looks like a perfect mommy or daddy to a borderline, but they continually get disappointed, and then they have a tantrum. The narcissistic person sees the borderline as a good mark, and the relationships tend to be extremely difficult and intense because of that. These are extremely hard situations for people to grow, mostly because there's a lot of denial that tends to happen, but it is possible.